Hello, and welcome to part 3 of this broadcast on account access and financial education for youth participating in employment programs, hosted by the National Credit Union Administration and Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. Helping young people build and create financial stability requires a team of community partners. We recognize the workforce program, financial institutions, and other stakeholders from across the country who have joined us today to learn more, hear more, and take action to improve the financial capability of America's youth. I'm Natasha McAdoo, Financial Literacy and Outreach Specialist with Ncua's Office of Consumer Financial Protection. I will be your moderator for this broadcast, along with my colleague, Tracy Morris, Senior Community Affairs Specialist with the FDIC's Division of Depositor and Consumer Protection. Before we begin, please follow along as I review the information on your screen for the best viewing experience. All attendees will be in listen-only mode. And if your volume sounds too low, check to make sure your volume is turned all the way up on your computer. If that doesn't work, you may have to plug in external speakers. If you have questions, you can submit them at any time using the Q&A portion located at the bottom right-hand corner of your WebEx console. However, please keep the Q&A status in the default mode of Ask All Panelists. Questions will be addressed verbally during the Q&A portion of this webinar as time allows. Please allow pop-ups during the broadcast. Closed captions will be available within the WebEx console. At the beginning of the meeting, attendees will find a disclaimer message with the multimedia viewer window. The attendees will need to click the Continue button in order to view the live closed captions. This webinar will be available for future viewing on Ncua's YouTube channel in the coming weeks. And as a quick reminder, the views and opinions expressed during this broadcast are those of the presenters and do not reflect the official views of, nor should be considered an endorsement by, the Board of Directors, its management, or staff of the Ncua or the FDIC. The FDIC and Ncua have partnered on many initiatives geared at improving the financial capability of young people across the country. We have placed a special focus on promoting ways young people can gain access to federally insured credit unions and bank accounts accompanied with financial education. Now, Tracy Morris will provide an overview of what we plan to cover on this broadcast. Tracy?
Thank you, Natasha. The FDIC is pleased to collaborate with Ncua, and we welcome you in joining today's webinar. This is our third webinar where we've co-hosted highlighting youth employment opportunities combined with financial education and account access. We have an exciting lineup of speakers today. First, the Honorable Ncua Chairman Todd Harper will discuss the Ncua's commitment to financial education and its support of youth account access and inclusion. Then, Emerson Hall, Associate Director, Community Affairs with the FDIC, will discuss the FDIC's commitment to financial inclusion. Afterward, the National Endowment for Financial Education NEFE expert Chelsea Norton will share insights from NEFE's personal finance ecosystem and discuss popular media outlets that young people seek to increase their personal financial knowledge. And as a surprise wrap-up, NEFE will lead a live interview with Finfluencer Markia Brown, aka the Money Plug. Finally, Natasha and I will highlight our agency's resources, as well as others, which support youth financial capability. Again, thank you for joining us today, and I hope this webinar will provide you with the information you need to pursue account access and financial education for youth in your communities.
Thank you, Tracy. We are in for an engaging event. Without any further delay, I would like to gratefully welcome Honorable Chairman Todd Harper to begin the presentation part of our program. Chairman Harper, over to you.
Thank you so much, Natasha, and good afternoon, everyone. Each year, we at the Ncua, along with other financial regulators and consumer advocates, participate in the National Financial Capability Month. This initiative raises awareness about the importance of personal financial education as well as financial literacy. As part of that effort, we participate in this ongoing series in partnership with the FDIC called Account Access and Financial Education for Youth Participating in Employment Programs. This series of webinars equips stakeholders with the tools they need to help younger consumers on the road to a strong financial future. Today is part 3 of the series, and it will focus on the factors and tools that influence youth financial behavior. I would like to thank our partners at the FDIC for co-hosting this webinar and for working with the Ncua on our shared commitment of expanding youth financial capability throughout the country. We look forward to our continued partnership on this and many other important initiatives. Finance and communications have changed dramatically over the last decade. Financial education and resources on mortgage and auto lending, investing, and retirement planning can now largely be found online and through social media channels. And younger consumers are using these outlets. In fact, a January article from The Economist notes that nearly a quarter of investors aged 18 to 40 and 41% of those between the ages of 18 and 24 years old have sought financial advice through the social media site TikTok. And according to a survey released by the National Association of Personal Financial Advisors, over 1/4 of Gen Z Americans receive their financial advice from social media channels. YouTube is the most popular forum for Gen Z and millennial consumers to discuss financial planning, though TikTok is gaining in popularity. These trends signal a new and exciting chapter in consumer education that democratizes information and provides much needed accessibility to demographics and communities often overlooked in the financial space. Nevertheless, there is always the concern that unvetted online content comes with a certain level of consumer risk. That is where we, as financial regulators and educators, are best positioned to provide trusted and unbiased information. Financial regulators such as the Ncua and the FDIC support the public at all stages of their financial journeys by providing tools to assist in decision-making, offering financial education programming, and raising awareness of and access to safe, fair, and affordable financial products and services. To help you better understand the ways younger consumers further their personal financial knowledge, we welcome Chelsea Norton with the National Endowment for Financial Education. Chelsea will share her insights from the Foundation's personal finance ecosystem to demonstrate financial education's role in one's financial well-being and within the broader environment. Ms. Norton will also introduce a Finfluencer who is narrowing the wealth gap in communities of color by using social media to teach money management. Lastly, Chelsea will discuss new and innovative ways to enhance your financial education and outreach programs. Thank you again for all of you who are participating today. We look forward to your questions and feedback. As always, be safe, be well, and be kind, but most of all, be financially capable. And now, Emerson, over to you.
Thank you, Chairman Harper. I'm delighted to join today's webinar on youth financial capability. And thank you, Tracy and the FDIC team for inviting me. There are only a few things more important than youth learning about how to manage their financial resources. As been stated before, this is the FDIC and National Credit Union Administration's third webinar aimed at providing information for bankers, credit union officials, and youth workforce practitioners. Today's topic is important and timely as many youth are gearing up for the summer youth employment programs. For the workforce practitioners on the call today, you play a critical role in helping young people take the first steps toward financial capability. We admire and appreciate the work you do every day, providing our young people with the opportunity to earn a paycheck. Many of us can remember our first job and the first paychecks, how it made us feel, and what we decided to do with the money. In some cases, those first paychecks establishes the foundation of how we would go about managing our money in the future. If we learned to save, we became savers. If some were undisciplined, many would go on to continue to spend most of their paychecks. For many youth, this may be the first time they have earned their own money. Others may have worked the previous summer. Some may have plans for their paychecks, others may not. But you can help provide direction on how these young persons can best manage their paychecks. During today's webinar, we'll hear from the National Endowment of Financial Education. Our guest speaker, Ms. Norton, will talk about their personal finance ecosystem. You will hear that young people obtain their financial education from multiple sources. Parents, caregivers play an enormous role in how their children and teens interact with money. Some school systems have incorporated financial education into their curriculum. During the FDIC's Youth Savings Pilot, we learned that youth more often are receptive to learning from their peers. Many young persons are turning to social media outlets for financial information. Bankers and credit union officials, please know that you continue to serve a vital role in helping youth towards their financial well-being. FDIC encourages banks to support low to moderate income communities by providing financial education, including using the award-winning FDIC Money Smart curriculum and allowing youth to open affordable and sustainable accounts. For workforce practitioners participating on today's webinar, we encourage you to reach out to your local financial institutions to support your efforts in delivering financial education to youth in your programs, especially organizations serving Black, Indigenous, people of color communities. We'll provide information at the end of the webinar on FDIC resources, including our technical assistance programs. Finally, I would like to thank the National Credit Union Administration for your continued collaboration to encourage financial institutions to work within low to moderate communities to support our youth. I also want to thank our speakers and the FDIC and the Ncua team that are committed to improving the lives of our country's youth. And I want to thank you as attendees for your commitment to hear and to learn more of what you can do to assist in this very important work. Enjoy the webinar. And at this time, I'll turn the virtual mic back to Tracy to introduce our first speaker. Tracy?
Thank you. Next up is Chelsea Norton. Chelsea is the Managing Director of Marketing and Engagement at the National Endowment for Financial Education, or NEFE, where she leads the marketing team in engaging with NEFE's community, developing and executing strategies to promote the organization's important work in championing effective financial education through research and thought leadership. She utilizes over a decade of experience in multi-channel marketing to execute thoughtful campaigns with a lens for continual assessment and improvement of results. She brings a passion for financial capability to her work. Having been employed for several years in her early career at a small credit union as a collections specialist and loan officer, she understands firsthand how financial matters encompass the lives and well-being of Americans today. Prior to joining NEFE, Chelsea worked as a senior marketing manager at an event production agency, creating thought leadership experiences for Fortune 500 companies, and as a digital marketing specialist at a boutique marketing agency. Welcome, Chelsea.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here today. Thank you to the FDIC and the Ncua for hosting this webinar, to Mrs. Hall and Harper, and also to Natasha and Tracy for facilitating this with me, and special thanks to Markia for being here. As Tracy mentioned, prior to working at NEFE and prior to my grad school years, I did spend about a collective 10 years working in banks and credit unions. So I'm really happy to be speaking to many of you today. I'm going to go ahead and share my slide deck to get started here. Okay, so in my role as Managing Director of Marketing and Engagement at NEFE, I spent a lot of time devising campaigns to reach different types of audiences. And one concept that has become central to my work is that people in different age groups prefer different channels for consuming and for communicating. And so because of this, it's important to learn what channels your audience is utilizing, why they're choosing that channel, what rules and norms you need to follow in order to be an effective communicator on that channel as well. So today I'm really looking forward to diving deeper into one particular set of channels that younger people rely on heavily, not only for entertainment, but also for education, for advice and connection. And of course, I'm referring to social media. In particular, I'm going to discuss how personal finance influencers, or Finfluencers, as you've heard the term used now, are interacting with their audiences on social media. And we'll dive deeper into a case study about the social media channel TikTok, and that's where we'll get to speak with our Finfluencer, Markia Brown, about her channel to learn more about how she's creating a community, sharing information, gathering content ideas, and maintaining her presence on TikTok. So first of all, I'd like to talk about financial well-being. And, I think to frame any conversation about how a specific generation of people or a specific group of people are seeking out financial education, we need to understand a little bit more about the factors that go into their financial well-being. It's important to understand that there are many different elements that comprise a person's financial well-being. And to help illustrate all of the different components and influences, NEFE has created a framework that we call the personal finance ecosystem. So for the next several minutes, I'd like to share that framework and discuss where different organizations and channels and approaches fit in to the framework to influence a person's overall level of financial well-being. So without further ado, I'm going to jump right into that. Here is the current personal finance ecosystem framework. So this is the newest version of what constitutes a work in progress for NEFE. We've been working on refining this over at least the last few years. And the purpose of this framework is to give nuance and context across the spectrum of financial well-being. So we've designed this to be a person-centric model. And I'm hoping that the material that I share today illustrates how complex the picture of an individual's personal financial well-being can be. So at the center is an individual's financial well-being, and that is the ultimate outcome that we're striving for. And then on each side, you can see overlapping circles that influence financial well-being. Each of those circles in turn contain various elements that contribute to the core areas. And those are grouped as foundational factors, financial knowledge and access, and financial actions and outcomes. So the ecosystem core is then surrounded by interventions at specific leverage points, and we call those catalysts for change. They are the individuals, organizations, and institutions in our field that are working toward the advancement of others' financial well-being. So I'm going to dive into this section by section and explain a little bit more about how each of these components work together. So here I'm showing the core elements of the ecosystem. The ecosystem core highlights the individual components that comprise and influence a person's financial well-being. And the factors that influence financial well-being can broadly be divided into these three areas that I mentioned before. Again, foundational factors, financial knowledge and access, and financial actions and outcomes. So financial factors are internal and external factors such as general skills and competencies, values and beliefs, and a range of cultural, familiar, and socioeconomic factors. And then financial knowledge and access is a person's current level of financial knowledge and skill and their access to financial products and services. And lastly, financial actions and outcomes are the actions that a person can take, including inaction, the decisions they make, and the resulting outcomes. Unexpected events also play a role in the cycle. None of these components are things that you either have or lack with permanency, and I think that's important to note. Each person's ecosystem includes them to some degree or another, and you'll see that a little bit better as we dive deeper in. So first, let's talk about financial well-being. It's at the core, and it is the heartbeat of the framework. It is intentionally placed at the center of our model, and it's very important to note that financial well-being is not a point of arrival. Like other components within the ecosystem, it is an ever-present state, and it's experienced by every person individually, and it fluctuates and can change over time. So because it's a fluid state that changes, a person does not achieve financial well-being, so to speak. It doesn't start or end. Financial well-being rather is self-defined by the individual. So what is a person's current level of financial well-being in their life? And that can change over time. We often use a sample of a pain scale in a doctor's office to think about this. So two people could be experiencing a very similar affliction, and they might score themselves very differently based on their own pain tolerance and any other number of factors. But the important thing is that that individual's experience with it and how they feel about it is what the doctor is checking for. And it's the same with financial well-being. Each person gets to say how they feel about their situation. They may feel okay despite significant challenges where another person may not. Financial well-being typically includes things like satisfaction with managing one's current financial situation, their ability to exercise choice and feel some sense of control, and their feelings about the future. So next, let's talk about foundational factors. So the foundational factors, as I mentioned before, first of all, they influence every part of the framework. They're present for every individual. The particular influence that they have depends on a person's unique lived experience. So for instance, my cultural heritage and geographical location may have a very large impact on the way I view financial topics and my own financial well-being, and that may be very different from my friends, my neighbors, people in my community, people elsewhere. Also, my own cognitive ability to understand financial concepts can also impact my financial well-being and also influence other areas of the ecosystem. So then the next area, the core area, is financial knowledge and access. And that summarizes the ability for an individual to act in their own financial best interest. And again, that is self-defined by the individual. So it's made up of two parts. One is financial knowledge and the skill to decide or act. So many of us think about financial capability as kind of financial knowledge and skills. That's the kind of the equation the NEFE has drawn there. And then also the opportunity to take action and exercise choice within financial society. We've termed that access and inclusion. So, you know, you may have the skill, but do you have the access to be able to participate? So both of those factors are really important. And then financial outcomes and actions is the final core component. It's a cycle. It's a feedback loop made up of mindset and your available choices and your decisions and actions, and then the resulting outcomes of those decisions. And then whatever those outcomes are determines, you know, what your mindset and choice set is in the future and so on. You know, thus it's a cyclical component of the framework. This is where essential financial decision-making lives within the framework. And while financial being is something that you define for yourself, the financial actions that you take and the results of those actions play a large part in that well-being. So we make financial decisions all the time, from daily purchasing decisions to big picture choices like where we live, what job we take, you know, whether to start a family. The starting point of the cycle is your mindset and your available choice set, which is how you feel about that decision when you're going into it, and then what choices are actually on the table for you to make. Financial knowledge and skill have a big part to play here, including whether or not you have confidence, what your objective knowledge is, and then how you apply that knowledge to the choice at hand. And it stands to reason that if you can act in your own best financial interest, your mindset and available choices will likely shift. Once a financial choice or action is made, an outcome happens. These are both objective, like let's say you open a new bank account, and they could be subjective, like you have feelings of satisfaction about opening a new bank account. Outcomes also happen from unexpected events, like maybe you got a flat tire and you have to pay to replace that. Or maybe it's a positive unexpected event, like you got a raise at work. It's important to note that not all financial disruptions can be prepared for. Some of them are unexpected and are an outflow of financial decisions and actions. And like several other components of the ecosystem, there are some things that an individual cannot change or control, but they still impact the outcomes and a person's experience, and thus an overall person's feeling of financial well-being. So just to recap the core framework, everyone has a current level of financial well-being. Everyone is making financial decisions and experiencing their own outcomes. And everyone has a current level of financial skill and access. And everyone is impacted by their own financial or foundational factors, including things like systemic barriers. And then keep in mind that financial well-being shifts based on a complex combination of all of these components of the ecosystem. So it's not a perfect science where we can exactly predict the impact of a change to any of these factors because people's lived experiences are varied. But you can try a thought experiment. For example, we can imagine that a person's values might shift as their life circumstances change. So let's say a student, may have different values when they're an incoming freshman in college versus when they're a graduating senior. Or think about an external influence, and I'll speak to those in a moment when we discuss catalysts for change. But think about something like the passage of a stimulus bill. What might the financial ripple effect be of a new stimulus payout? What does that look like in terms of affecting areas like access, financial actions and outcomes, and ultimately financial well-being? So the last layer of the personal finance ecosystem that I want to talk about today is catalysts for change. And this is probably the most important layer for our discussion. Catalysts for change have to do with an individual, with the individuals, organizations, and the institutions in our field that wish to increase another's financial well-being. So this is where you as credit union officials, bankers, community organizations, financial counselors, influencers, policymakers, and more come in. NEFE groups these catalysts into 4 leverage points, each acting on a different part of the personal finance ecosystem. These catalysts for change are noted in the bold burgundy text that you see on this layer of the model. And the 4 catalysts for change are knowledge influencers, structural policy changes, behavioral influencers, and social and material supports. So I'll describe each of these in more detail on the following slides, but first, it's important to note that research and evaluation, which you'll see at the bottom part of the framework, it's not being noted in the model as directly impacting only foundational factors. I know it appears down there in the model, but it's meant by the way that it's positioned without an arrow to imply that it is something that can influence all of the different components of the framework. That means that we haven't noted it specifically as a catalyst for change, solely to foundational factors again. Policies and interventions aimed at components of foundational factors are beyond the scope of this framework. And that's typically because they don't necessarily have the primary end goal in mind of influencing financial well-being, although influencing financial well-being can absolutely be a byproduct. But catalysts for change, as we've specifically defined them for this model, are explicitly focused on financial well-being. So let's talk about knowledge influencers first of all, the first catalyst for change, and that acts upon financial knowledge and skills. So there are 2 main types, financial education and then financial information and tools, with financial education having higher levels of impact on knowledge and decision-making skills. So at NEFE, we've defined financial education as a systemic approach to cultivating financial knowledge and financial decision-making skills. It uses appropriate pedagogy, learning objectives, and assessment techniques, and it's also of a long enough duration for a learner to incorporate new knowledge into their existing knowledge base. So a good example of where you might find financial education is being taught as curriculum in schools or as a series of workshops through community support organizations, financial institutions, etc. Financial information and tools, on the other hand, are smaller dose interventions that on their own do not constitute financial education because they lack that pedagogy, the learning outcomes, and assessment techniques. However, they can and should be used as a part of financial education program and initiatives and are often delivered just as more easily consumable and just-in-time methods. So differentiating between financial education and financial information and tools has implications for what we can expect that particular intervention to reasonably achieve, right? So setting kind of our goals for what we hope to accomplish, whether we're delivering financial education or whether we're delivering financial information and tools. For example, we probably wouldn't expect informational flyers or articles to have a lasting impact, similar to, say, a full semester personal finance course. Webinars, for instance, are a great way to present financial information. Social media is another common and a very hugely influential channel which organizations and influencers are using to share personal finance content. So the next catalyst for change is structural policy changes, and they act upon the access and inclusion core area by increasing participation in the financial environment. So policy definitely is and should be threaded throughout the entire ecosystem, but for our purposes, we narrow in on issues of full inclusion in financial society. Because barriers to full participation are largely systemic, these issues must be addressed with fundamental structural change. One example of a policy change acting as a catalyst for change is the adoption of rent reporting, which creates new opportunities for people who were previously credit invisible to receive scoreable credit reports. And in turn, these people then have access to new sets of products and services, which may lead them to a higher level of financial well-being. Next is behavioral influencers, which act on decisions and actions. There are a variety of interventions that are designed to help an individual make decisions and cultivate certain behaviors, and these fall into our behavioral influencers catalyst. This might include things like just-in-time nudges, just-in-time information, as well as in-depth support like financial counseling or coaching. And we distinguish behavior influencers from knowledge influencers based on the intent. So the important definition there is intent. Most often these interventions are trying to influence your behavior rather than checking for knowledge gain. So they may influence your knowledge and decision-making skills, but that's not necessarily the specific goal of behavior influencers. Another example here is, let's say, a fintech app. It might give somebody a nudge toward developing a savings habit, for instance. And while financial knowledge for that person may increase as a byproduct of using the app's ultimate objective is to influence spending and saving choices. So that app we would consider for the purposes of this framework to be a behavioral influencer. So finally, social and material supports, which help change the outcome an individual could experience from a specific or an unexpected event. Social and material supports act as a safety net. Sometimes they're used to alleviate the effect of a financial shock or aid needed to meet basic needs. They can be in the form of public benefits or services rendered by community organizations or the government, such as employment insurance, healthcare through a community-funded clinic, for example, even the SNAP program. So for each of the catalysts for change, the resulting impact on financial well-being depends both on the quality and also the intervention, the quality of the intervention, as well as the dosage. For example, for greatest impact, knowledge influencers should feature materials that are accurate, that are comprehensive, that have been evaluated, and are culturally inclusive. And educators should be trained or qualified. As well, learning objectives should tie the content to the content to be appropriately evaluated. And finally, it's crucial that we contextualize our work within the broader ecosystem. So the people we serve all arrive at interventions with their own unique personal finance ecosystem, right? Their own unique level of financial well-being, and with a set of factors that may be outside of their control. No one intervention is a silver bullet for achieving financial well-being, and that includes financial education, even if it's delivered perfectly. And that's just owing to the complexity of all of these other factors. So this is why it's important that we come together from a variety of disciplines and areas of the ecosystem. And all our work matters when it comes to increasing financial well-being for the people that we serve. So I do want to mention that if you'd like to learn more about the personal finance ecosystem, NEFE does have additional materials on our website, including an explainer video and a narrative document, and we're going to be adding more resources throughout the year. So you could go to www.nefe.org, that's NEFE.org, and when you hover over our initiatives tab, you'll see a sub-navigation item for the personal finance ecosystem. So now we've covered the basics of the personal finance ecosystem. We've understood the different factors that influence a person's financial well-being, and that a person's financial well-being can change over time. I want to transition now to this point to discussing some of the trends that we have seen about the way that young people today are consuming financial information and tools, and then how we can reach them where they're at. So you're probably pretty familiar with how generations are classified into groups. This isn't always the type of groupings that are used, but it's a fairly familiar grouping here that I've included. Boomers, Gen X, millennials, which is the group that I identify in Gen Z, and I'm going to just say etc. So as yet, I haven't heard a name or a title for the newest generation, which is kids 9 years old and younger. But because they're largely not yet in the position to be making financial decisions, we're just going to go ahead and leave them unnamed for the purposes of the presentation here. So take a quick look, find yourself here. You probably already know where you are. Sometimes there's little fluctuation in terms of the years, but this is generally the classification that I've seen. So for the purposes of the remainder of the presentation, I'm going to define young people, as we've mentioned throughout the webinar already today, as Gen Z. In the United States of America, members of Gen Z are largely in their formative years. They're spanning anywhere from wrapping up their time in elementary school to progressing through high school, and then ultimately either seeking higher education or entering the workforce. It's important to remember that this generation does span 15 years. So imagine the different life experiences of a 25-year-old right now and a 10-year-old right now, and how that 10-year-old's life experience could be so dramatically different when they're 25 than a 25-year-old's experience is today. So the generational designation is not perfect, but we do see trends or common threads that are shared by large numbers of youth who fall into this generational category. And so this is kind of the helpful reference that we'll use today. So let's discuss some of the common characteristics of members of Gen Z. I've pulled this information from the Annie E. Casey Foundation, which summarizes Pew Research to arrive at this list of commonalities. So as the US's demographics continue to shift, Gen Z is expected to be the last generation that is predominantly white, with a slight majority of 52%. The majority of this generation will also remember witnessing the country's first Black president and the legalization of gay marriage. They're also more likely than previous generations to have grown up in a single parent, multiracial, or a gender diverse household. If we consider millennials as digital pioneers, millennials, the prior generation, as digital pioneers, many millennials will remember when the internet became a thing and probably had dial-up modems in their house. The Gen Z, we're considering basically our first digital natives. So they've always had technology. It's been ubiquitous in their house. You know, smartphones have always been a thing for them. Social media really exploded during their childhood, and they're the first generation whose parents have become very overtly concerned about screen time. So far from what we can tell, Gen Z's financial mindset centers around financial pragmatism and security. And this is because they saw their parents struggling through the Great Recession. Their generation seems to be shifting more toward conservative spending, stable jobs, smart investments, things like that. Sadly, Gen Z is referred to as the loneliest generation. They report greater feelings of loneliness and depression than past generations, and they're also extremely high users of social media, which definitely has drawbacks in addition to its benefits when it comes to mental health. Because of their large social networks and technology savvy, Gen Zers are more likely to spend time consuming and comparing and weighing options before they make important decisions, including financial decisions. So they're more likely to be swayed by the recommendations of real life users of products rather than celebrity endorsements. And that's a pretty significant shift that we're seeing in the younger generation. And then lastly, even among conservatives, Gen Zers are more progressive on social issues. So I've pulled this graph from a website owned by the organization YPulse, which gathers data and insights on the younger generations. And I really like this particular scale because it outlines some major differences emerging between millennials, which are ages 26 to 42, and Gen Z. And one major thing that you can see, and a lesson that we're learning about Gen Z, is that they're not using Facebook nearly as much as the prior generation, by quite a large margin, as you can see on the graph there. Much more of their social media consumption is trending toward video-first platforms, as well as platforms that prioritize real-time communication and community building. So you can see from this graph that the most popular social media outlets for Gen Z are Instagram, YouTube, Twitter, and Snapchat. I'm sorry, and TikTok, not Twitter, and TikTok. So that previous graph again showed us that Gen Zers use Instagram, YouTube, Snapchat, TikTok. It's actually in that order. why these platforms, they use them, and what makes them different from other social media platforms used more frequently by millennials and older generations. Let's take a look at that. So, one reason is that these platforms, with the exception of YouTube, emphasize short form video content. So that allows the user to scan through videos providing content of all kinds, and is designed to be absorbed in a brief period of time. So think of this as, really quick snapshots, knowledge bits, your brief explainer videos. Another characteristic of these platforms is they allow users to be content creators, and Gen Zers value creativity and entrepreneurship. Their preferred social media basically puts them in the driver's seat when it comes to creating an online image and potentially monetizing their content. And the explosion of social media over the last decade has created pathways for many people to build businesses and to monetize their work through their own online personas. So next, we're going to talk about influencers, or as they're nicknamed for personal finance purposes, Finfluencers. So influencers use social media as their primary communication vehicle with their followers. Influencers build a reputation for their knowledge and expertise on a specific topic, and they have an increasingly powerful influence over purchasing decisions and consumer behavior. According to digitalmarketing.org, 92% of consumers trust recommendations from other people, even someone that they don't know, over brand content. And that's why influencers are becoming so powerful. Finfluencers, financial education, personal finance, and financial well-being influencers, there's thousands of them out there. They're on every social media platform, and the number is growing every day. Because Finfluencers show up on social media as themselves, people with families, hobbies, likes and dislikes, personal stories, they can build powerful personal connections and create loyalty among their followers. Now let's take a look at some of the standout influencers on social media. And to do that, I'm going to go ahead and play a video for you. And we're going to just look at some brief clips from different influencers on the platforms, and I'll provide a little bit of an overview for each one. So bear with me for one moment. I'm getting the video pulled up here. Just giving it a second to load. Okay, so I'm going to start with one from our Finfluencer guest speaker, Markia Brown, aka the Money Plug, who we'll be speaking with shortly. Markia has a follower base of approximately 170,000 followers, and in this video, she's going to talk about buy now, pay later, which is a ever increasingly popular phenomenon for young people.
Paying all your stuff off right before you go house shopping might be hurting you more than it's helping you. What's up, everybody? It's Markia, aka the Money Plug, aka your credit specialist's favorite credit specialist. So if you're paying these things off because you need to lower your debt to income ratio, then this tip doesn't exactly apply to you. However, for the rest of you, paying things off right before you go house hunting could drastically affect your credit score, depending on how many things you have reporting. Remember, whenever you close an account, so whenever you pay something off, you always lose points because you no longer have that account reporting every month. Even though it's still going to be reporting the previous history, it's now going to be listed as closed, and that's where the loss in points comes from. This is why it's very important to make sure you have a good mix of accounts. So open and closed installment loans and revolving lines of credit.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought Markia, I gave away punchline. Markia's video was not about buy now, pay later, as you just saw. Sorry about that, Markia. I got ahead of myself, but you get the picture. That was a great video. Thank you. So the next video that I'm going to share is from Humphrey Yang. He has a follower base of 3.1 million, and he uses his platform to communicate about a variety of personal finance issues, providing basic informational or educational framework. He's recently been focusing more on explaining the exploding world of cryptocurrency and NFTs, which are two topics that are intriguing to Gen Z.
So a common mistake I see a lot of people making when investing in an IRA or a Roth IRA is the following. They'll basically contribute to their Roth IRA or their IRA. As we can see here, we have $4,200 available to trade in a federal money market fund. But just because it's being contributed doesn't actually mean it's being invested. So after you contribute, you need to invest that money. But what do you invest in? Well, for me, I like ETFs. So for example, I have an all world ETF right here, the S&P 500 ETF and the total stock market ETF. Now these two overlap a little bit, but still this is a good idea of what you should be investing in your IRA. If you just contribute, but you don't invest, then the IRA is just like a savings account. So don't do that. Make sure you invest your money. I hope that this was helpful.
So lastly, we have Haley Sachs, who goes by Mrs. Dow Jones. Haley has approximately 186,000 followers on TikTok, and her content is very clearly aimed at younger adults. And she's the one in this video, she's going to be discussing the concept of buy now, pay later.
Okay, I'm literally obsessed with your dress. Is it from Reformation? Yes, I got it using buy now, pay later for only like $20 a month. No, what? Why? What do you mean? BNPL is totally harmless. Everyone uses it. Would you have bought that dress without buy now, pay later? I don't know, probably not. Exactly. It tricked you into buying something you can't afford. And the more purchases you make like this, the more you'll owe them money and the more of a habit it becomes.
All right, so let me just make sure that I'm still, yep, I'm going to go ahead and reshare my screen for you. Okay, so just for those of you that were able to see the videos, I hope you enjoyed them. We'll, again, like I said, we'll try and see if we can make it possible for people to be able to view that clip potentially after the webinar. So we've discussed all the different factors in the personal finance ecosystem that impact financial well-being. We've learned that the majority of young people are turning to social media as a major source of news and information. And at this point, you might be thinking, well, I guess we've got to get a social media account for our organization if we want to reach young people. But not too fast. Fortunately, there's another way that you can reach young people on social media without having to commit the significant time and personnel resources that creating and maintaining an effective social media profile requires. And that is collaborating with influencers. So Finfluencers often collaborate with financial institutions and other organizations whose products or missions that they believe in. It is very key that a Finfluencer feels some kind of a connection with the product or service that they're mentioning. But if they do, that organization may say pay a sponsorship fee to a Finfluencer or make some kind of an in-kind exchange, such as a donation to an organization of the Finfluencer's choosing, in order to have them make a specific product or service recommendation to their followers. So because there are so many Finfluencers out there, it's important for you to know how to spot a good one. And by that, we mean someone who not only shares content that aligns with your organization's goals, but who is also credible and has an engaged follower base. Rather than just looking at the number of followers they have, you want to do things like check to see how many comments, likes, and shares their post gets. So the reason for that is because follower totals can be faked pretty easily. There are a lot of bots out there that inflate follower numbers, but comments, likes, and shares are true indicators that this Finfluencer's content is resonating with their followers and that they have a relationship with them. Next, look for a specialist. If a Finfluencer specializes in a specific topic, they'll have more authority and influence over that topic. And the more a Finfluencer's niche aligns with yours, the more likely your collaboration is going to yield results for you. You'll also want to work with Finfluencers who are authentic, who have meaningful conversations with their followers and are responsive to them. And then finally, many Finfluencers do have credentials that make them more qualified to speak about specific financial topics. For example, a certified financial planner might use social media to engage with their current and potential clients on topics that directly relate to their training and expertise. So if the Finfluencer has received some kind of formal education or training around their topic of interest, they'll have greater perceived authority with their audience, and the information that they provide is more likely to be accurate. So as I mentioned, you do not have to create your own social media account to reach young people on social media, but some organizations might choose to have a presence despite. For instance, NEFE has an active presence on Twitter and LinkedIn, and we share news updates and engage with our audience around the work that we're doing on those platforms. If you decide to create a social media profile for your organization, there's definitely some guidelines that I'd like to recommend. So, and if you've got an existing profile, take these into consideration. First of all, make sure that you're not getting in over your head by creating too many profiles at once that you can't regularly maintain. So we just talked about YouTube, TikTok, Snapchat, Instagram. I do not recommend that you go open all of those. That would be a lot of work for you. It really is important that you regularly maintain a presence on these platforms. So start with one and see how it goes. Make sure that you're personalizing the content for the audience that you're trying to reach. So figure out what social media channels they prefer, and then create content specifically for them that specifically fits with how people consume information on that channel. So I said it before, but it's not enough to just create a profile. You have to use it. People will see the content that you're posting in the news feed of the social media account, but they aren't going to go looking for your business page to see what you've posted necessarily. So you need to actually show up in the news feed, and the news feed refreshes pretty quickly. A post could be pushed to the bottom of a person's feed within just a few seconds, depending on that platform. So one way that you can help to retain relevancy and continue to be found by people is utilizing things like tagging, so that when somebody uses search in the social media application, you could come up for the content that they're searching for. Young people often go to their social media channels for entertainment and for stress management, so keep that in mind. That's the reason they're on the channel. Create content that complements their experience on that channel. And if you work with influencers, remember that they're most likely not performing a public service. They have a brand and they're seeking to maintain and often run a business. So aim to provide some kind of benefit to them in return for their willingness to collaborate with you. And along those lines, you can't expect to control everything that a influencer says on their platform, and they may possess views that differ from your position as an organization, but that doesn't mean that you can't work with them. If you do, though, it is important that you provide proper disclaimers, allowing that influencer to retain their independent voice and setting clear boundaries for your organization. So at the end of the day, it's important to remember that financial institutions and organizations inhabit a very crucial place in the personal finance ecosystem, and so do finfluencers. Organizations provide the products and services that people need in order to improve their financial well-being, and finfluencers play a critical role in encouraging consumers, especially young people, to take advantage of the goods and services that financial institutions and organizations offer. So collaborating across the ecosystem is a great way to increase the likelihood that young people will take advantage of the right opportunities, the opportunities that your organizations offer to increase their financial well-being. So I'm now excited for the next part of this presentation here, and that's where I'd like to introduce my special guest, Markia Brown. I'm very happy that she's agreed to be with us today, and I think that the webinar hosts are going to help put Markia and I up here on the stage as speakers so that you can see us talking to each other. But first, I'm going to introduce Markia to you. She is a U.S. Army retired veteran turned credit literacy coach. Markia has a total reach of over 2 million followers across TikTok, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and Twitter. And with TikTok being her primary platform, she uses the app to provide financial literacy education and resources to Black and other underserved communities. She's going to be joining us today to share her insights around being a finfluencer on TikTok and to offer advice on how financial institutions can engage on social media. So without further ado, let's dive in. Markia, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Excellent. Thank you. I'm so glad that you're with us today. And I think, you know, you're really in a unique position where the rest of us, you know, many of us probably here on the call are working for organizations or institutions, but you are an entrepreneur working for yourself on the social media channel. So with that perspective in mind, I'd like to just start with, you know, who are your followers on TikTok?
So I have a very diverse following across all of my platforms, which kind of surprised me a lot. But primarily, I do have a lot of African-American followers, mainly Black women, who didn't have access to this kind of information in a way that they could understand it. We all, you know, the legal jargon is out there, the big words, the long, you know, 12-minute videos, but they didn't really, it wasn't really in a digestible form. And so TikTok really allowed me the freedom of being able to not only give them the resource, but interpret it and present it in a way that they can understand it.
I like that. So you chose TikTok as a platform for connecting with your audience because it, you know, A, they were probably on it, but B, it really gave you an opportunity to kind of connect with them in a way that you thought would be digestible for them.
Yes.
Awesome. So talk a little bit more about how you connect with your audience on TikTok then. You know, what's your strategy?
The biggest thing is engagement. I can talk at people all day, but I think the thing that sets me apart from a lot of the other larger creators is that I have the flexibility of being able to respond to every comment. I go live often, multiple times a week, to give people the opportunity to ask me questions in real time. And it's really just the engagement mostly that a lot of people value, because for a lot of people, maybe they're asking time sensitive questions, or maybe they're just here for one question, that's it. And then, maybe they weren't even planning on seeing me. I just popped up as they were scrolling, and they're like, I always wanted to ask somebody this. So the engagement is really key for my content. It's really what sets me apart from other people.
So how do you choose what content you're going to share on TikTok, whether or not it's posting it to your feed or sharing, something when you go live? I'm at a place now where the majority of my content comes from questions. So TikTok has a Q&A feature where people can kind of like drop questions when they want, or they tend to leave their questions or comments on my videos. And then that kind of goes back to my engagement. I'll pick a comment, and then TikTok has a feature where I can make a video to that comment. And so I'm really responding to what they're telling me they need. That's great. So it really is a conversation, even if it's delayed by a period of time when you're checking the comments. It sounds like your audience is really, understanding that you are live on the other end of the line and you're going to respond to them.
Exactly.
So, that our audience today includes a lot of credit union officials as well as bankers. And I'm wondering what you think are the most common or prevalent questions you get from followers of your audience that are being asked.
The number one question I get is, when am I supposed to get a bank account? Or where do I go to get a bank account? I talk a lot about establishing a home bank somewhere that handles the bulk of your transactions. And so how do I choose a home bank to establish a relationship? What's the difference between a credit union and a major bank? Those are literally the big questions that I get that honestly a simple Google search could fix. However, they want to hear it in a way that they can relate to instead of just reading words on a screen.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so those are some of the most common questions that you get, but how about what kind of questions do you get that surprise you from people that they don't know concerning financial education?
I think the biggest thing that surprises me is that a lot of people don't know that their local institutions offer a lot of resources, classes, sometimes workshops, things like that, even programs for entrepreneurs, because they don't even know how to get in contact with a local bank. A lot of people, especially with COVID, they don't leave the house too much, or they're not really ready to be in those confined spaces. And so they don't know that their local banks went virtual to offer these programs. They don't know about things like this webinar. And so the biggest thing is that they don't know where to look. They don't know what they don't know. And so, with my platform and other people, other Finfluencers, we are able to put that information where they are. For example, I joined a live on TikTok, I want to say about this was last Thursday, and they brought up the FDIC's Money Smart initiative. And we got so many questions regarding where can we find more information? What is this? And it's something that's been available online for a little while now, but they didn't know. So just giving them access to these resources that are already out there and are already proven to be successful, instead of kind of, like you said, reinventing the wheel, just spreading the word about it. And not knowing where to go to even hear more words about it. I think that's the biggest surprise being a Finfluencer.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's really interesting too. I can hear somebody who works at a bank or a credit union right now being like, but we have that on our website. They should know how to get in contact with us. But, what's interesting is that people, they'll kind of frequent the things that are familiar to them, right? So their social media feeds, that's where they're going to go. They're not necessarily going to follow your trail of breadcrumbs to find where you are. And so that's why it's important to be where they are, as opposed to expecting them to find you.
And something else that I think is a really good point to that. And it's whenever I do interviews, the first thing they ask is why social media? What made you start posting on social media? And I was like, that's where everybody is.
Yep.
the question is always, how can we reach more people? Just go where they already are. The Twitches, the podcasts, the Pinterest, Facebook, Instagrams, this is where the majority of this age group is spending their time. So why not just put the information there since they're already there? They'll instantly consume it, at least a portion of it, because it's already it's common to them. Getting programs into schools could be a big thing. They talked about during the presentation how a lot of employment programs are coming up. I'm a Baltimore native, and a program that we had was called YouthWorks. That was how I got my first job. And when I joined the military, that was my first big girl job. And something we had was a mandatory financial literacy class. It was 8 hours long. I literally cannot tell you nothing that was in that class, but it was mandatory, and they put the information in front of us to start the conversations. And I really think the more we expose this generation to the information, the more they'll start the dialogues. They'll start doing the research. They'll start, really getting into it themselves. But we first have to expose them to it.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and that's reflective of some of NEFE's research in the past that's kind of indicated, it's really important to have this financial educational framework and to expose people to financial education. But at the same time, it becomes really important for people at moments in their lives, right? So I had a personal finance educational course in high school, but maybe, that's kind of back in my subconscious. I know that I took it. There's some vague recollection. But when I'm looking to buy my first house or open a bank account, all of a sudden I'm going to be like, so, now I'm looking. Now is when I'm going to be asking those questions and doing the research. So being there just in time when someone is looking for something, we've done some research to indicate that that's also really important for helping people, increase their financial well-being.
That's true. A lot of the people who come to me with questions are people entering the home buying stage, or, they're finally ready to start getting credit cards and they're ready to make that decision. They're at a very pivotal point in their life. And so it's very important to have that information available at that really crucial moment so they don't mess up and kind of mess up the rest of their life, essentially.
Yeah. So speaking of the information that you provide, timely information, how do you conduct research? I know that you're a certified credit repair specialist, but how do you conduct research for the content that you're creating when you get, say, a new question, something that you're not familiar with?
The biggest thing is that I always try to get it directly from the source. So if it's not coming from, if they're having a question on how a credit score is calculated, if it's not coming directly from a company that creates credit scores or calculates credit scores, then I don't really find it a reputable source. Listening to other people is cool, but I also want to know, where did you get that information from? So for me, if it's something that I'm not familiar with, research is key, and I have to have it from the source. I'm really big on giving. The military taught me something called trust but verify. So I want people to trust what I'm saying, but I also want to provide them with the resources to find the information themselves, because maybe they'll have a better understanding if they, ingest the knowledge themselves. And so I always try to find resources that can aid them with that. Usually it's like, oh, you can go to this website right here for more information, or this YouTube channel has a, plethora of resources that could really answer your question. And even partnering with other Finfluencers who are more fluent in these subjects, that's really big in this industry as well.
Yeah, collaboration across the space is key. Finding somebody else when you're not the expert who is the expert. Absolutely. So what advice do you have for the people on the call today? Let's say that somebody has listened to this conversation. They're like, great, I should definitely start collaborating with a Finfluencer. What advice do you have for them on using discernment? Let's even talk about using discernment when you're viewing content from Finfluencers. So maybe it's not just them, but just anybody who's consuming information. How do you tell if this person is providing you good information?
Trust but verify. I'm really big on, I'm just here to create the dialogue. I'm here to spark your interest. I always want you to go do the research yourself. So, if you're trying to vet a Finfluencer, watch a bunch of their videos, look at their engagement, read the comments. We are all in that financial space, so we have at least a bare minimum knowledge and we know where to go for everything else. So, vetting the information yourself is key. look at, if they've ever had partnerships before, look at some of their previous partnerships to see how those went. And you also want to look at what your goal is. You don't want to be too broad when partnering with the Finfluencer. Usually, when I do partnerships, I'll get something called like a creator packet, and it talks about a very specific program or a very specific product even that they want to get out there, that they want to expose more people to. So you want to be as specific as possible on, hey, say this, say this, say this, don't say this, this, and this. And then a lot of times in the contracts as well, they restrict the kind of content that a Finfluencer can post within a certain time period. It's usually around 30 days. And it's usually something along the lines of, if I partner with one company, then I cannot partner with a competitor or post about a competitor within that 30-day period. So that's not really restricting my content, but it's also making sure that they are kind of like the headliner. And then because I engage with all of my content, for the next 30 days, that means the majority of my content is going to be based towards whatever that partnership was, whatever questions kind of came from that, which creates more engagement, more dialogue for that brand, that bank, that, product.
Yeah, that's great. So I like the idea of being able to keep the focus kind of top of mind on that specific either concept or that specific organization, et cetera. Just I guess a last question from me. Do you have any other, you've heard my suggestions about, let's say, somebody wants to collaborate with a Finfluencer, they want to be on social media, but, you've got this depth of experience that I don't have. What suggestions do you have for bankers or credit union officials if they want to connect with young audiences on social media?
I'm going to be honest, the biggest tip I can give you is representation matters. When you want to reach a lot of people, you're going to have a lot of representatives. That means, racially, religiously, if your product, for example, let's say you guys want to push opening bank accounts. So then the people who should be talking about this is people who are either Gen Zs or like on the cusp of a millennial, people who have experience recently or can vividly remember their experience opening up a bank account and really explain that process from beginning to end. We don't really, you don't want to get, a 50, 60-year-old person on TikTok being very verbose, going on and on and on about interest rates and things like that. You want them to relate to the person saying the content. It's just like my mom used to say, like she could say something 100 times and I would never get it. But as soon as like one of my friends said it, I instantly believed it. And that's literally how Gen Z operates. So if you can get people who look like them, shop at the same places, listen to the same music, they tend to be more attached to the information that's being put out.
Yeah, absolutely. I think resonance is super key, right? Again, it's not just showing up on a channel and saying, hey, we're here, but it's also showing up as people expect to see you and experience you on that channel, and remembering how important Gen Z's kind of trust network and peer network, is to them, and how much less likely they are just going to be to follow the advice of a brand, for instance, because a brand said it, right? So that is really crucial when you're talking about, accessing young people today and getting them to listen. Well, thank you so much. Your insights are wonderful for us. Markia and I are actually going to have this final Q&A together. So if anyone has questions for both Markia or myself, we're both going to be here. I'm going to turn the floor back over to, I believe, Natasha or Tracy. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Potentially. Oh, good. Someone stopped sharing it for me, maybe. Hopefully.
Yes, here.
Yes.
I think now, can you see mine? I'll get mine loaded up. Thank you, Chelsea and Markia. You both did a great job highlighting how the evolution of communication has changed dramatically. I know for myself, for example, if I want to get instruction on something new, I no longer look at a user manual. I go straight to a video, or I search for a video, because it's just so much easier to understand, and especially if you're a visual person. So thank you. Now we're going to switch to the audience. To remember, everyone remember to use the Ask a Question feature on the side of your console if you have a question, and ask for all panelists in the all panelist mode, or it will not go to us. So we're going to go over to Tracy now, who's going to read some of these questions. Tracy?
Great. Thanks, Natasha, and thanks, Markia and Chelsea. That's lots of great information. The first question that we have is for Markia. What topics do your followers tend to engage in most?
Oh my goodness. Choosing a bank and choosing accounts. There's so, especially with me being military affiliated, for me, I'm super exposed to like Navy Federal Credit Union, USAA, me being from Baltimore, I love like CQ, MEQ, things like that. But then there's, Bank of America, Wells Fargo. So it's so many choices, and it can be very, very overwhelming and overbearing. And so they come to me to make the decision for them, in a sense. They want me to narrow down their choices to help them make that decision, because they don't have anyone in their lives who can make that decision for them, and they don't know how to get into contact with the right people to help them make the decision that's best for them.
Great. And then kind of the reverse of that, what topics do they tend to engage least in?
That's a good one. Okay, so the topic they tend to engage in the least is anything regarding accountability. Anything that requires them to be like, you know what, maybe, this was my mistake. I shouldn't have done that, or I should have considered this first. It's a lot easier to pretend to blame someone else, or pretend you had nothing to do with the decision you just made. So that's the least engaged content, is anything regarding accountability.
Okay, and got a couple. Should TikTok information be done as a dance or a song, or just speaking?
So I'm gonna be honest, I have quite a few videos doing a dance or singing a song, but you don't have to. That's just, for me, that's my target audience. That's what I find entertaining, so I feel like they'll find it entertaining. But there's I always say there's a million ways to skin a cat. There's 1,000 ways to get information and disseminate it properly. But for some people, that tends to work.
Okay. And Markia, you mentioned YouthWorks. Understanding the constraint of training in summer youth employment programs, many of which have financial institution partners, what advice would you give those program providers for their for their financial literacy game?
So, last summer, I actually partnered with Towson University's SAGE program. It's a volunteer thing that they do at the school. And a lot of their kids were getting summer jobs, to help pay for tuition and things like that. And what they did was they made it a requirement for orientation. And so what they did was, it was available virtual. Everybody registered for the Zoom. We all showed up. They had a couple of us who were giving the information that you all disseminate. We literally used your resources to give these workshops. So, it would be 1,000 times better if they could come and get maybe pre-recorded content or something like that from the local banks, or, the FDIC or Ncua directly, to show their youth as a part of the orientation process. You have to check this box before you can go ahead and get a job. Because for most of these kids, this is their first job. So they probably never had a bank account before. So they have no idea what they should look for in an account. Or, let's say they're signing up for their first credit cards now that they have consistent income. They don't know anything about interest rates or rewards programs and what kind of perks kind of benefit them. So making it a requirement to kind of get to the next step in employment, one, it ensures that they are going to complete it. And then two, they're more interested, because like, Chelsea and I talked about, this is a very pivotal moment for them. So, they're looking for this kind of content at that time.
Great. And do Gen Zers tend to not want to go into a brick and mortar branch?
Yes. 1,000%. Online banking is becoming exceptionally popular, just because of the convenience of it. I'm gonna be honest with y'all, Gen Z is lazy. I got a couple Gen Zs in my house. They're lazy. They're looking for the quickest fix, the fastest, most convenient option. So that's why, you hear a lot of people doing webinars. The YouTube channels are becoming more and more popular with the how-tos and the DIYs. They don't want to go, like, it's, especially with COVID even, it really scares them to be in these confined spaces for long periods of time. So, and plus, it's boring. They don't want to hear people talking at them. They want to, be able to digest the content as they want to, as they're comfortable. And so for some of them, that means in the comfortableness of their own home. And so they want virtual.
Yeah, I would add to that too, that, think about everything that a person can do on their smartphone. So if there's a possibility that they can do just one more thing on their smartphone to make their lives convenient, particularly with the younger generations, people who are digital natives, they're going to choose that option oftentimes. Now, there's always exceptions, right? There's people who love it old school. I really like to read paperback books still, even though I can get books online and audiobooks, you know? And so there's going to be people that are going to want to come in and have that experience. But there are going to be more people probably that opt in to have that digital option. If it's online banking, you know, I mean, as long as it's a good experience, it doesn't have to be that it's a solely online bank, but you definitely want to understand that that's where people are going to automatically check first, and particularly young people who are digital natives, for being able to handle their work.
And Chelsea, to you, how can banks and credit unions be more approachable from their members without using TikTok or one of the other social media platforms? Or is that something that banks and credit unions should start at least considering?
I mean, like I said, you don't necessarily have to start your own social media accounts. You know, NEFE in particular does not have. Now, I guess it's important to preface this with, you know, my organization at NEFE, we are not looking to reach directly to consumers. We focus more on working with educators, organizations, thought partners, researchers, policymakers, et cetera. So my audience is going to be different than if you're wanting to reach, you know, people directly to have them take part in your products or services. But, you know, that being said, my organization has selected just a few social media accounts that match well with our audience to participate in. You know, I would like to mention that if TikTok and like doing a dance and all that kind of stuff is too intimidating, YouTube is a really good alternative because you can create content, you know, that's more, let's call it formal, let's call it things that you're familiar with. You know, it can be posting recordings of your webinars. It can be, you know, interviewing somebody for a few minutes and just having that kind of interview format and posting that. You can still take advantage of tagging, which is important. And YouTube is a huge vehicle for consumption, not just for Gen Z, but also for millennials. So, you know, I would say don't roll out all social media channels just because TikTok doesn't work for you. You know, but in general, I think also, like, let's back it up a little bit and just talk about relating to your audience. You know, like Markia said, representation is really important. It's really important to understand who you're trying to attract and what is unique about them, what factors make them unique and set them apart. You don't necessarily have to look like them, but it really is important that you understand who they are and that they do see some kind of representation somewhere, right? In your materials, in your work, in the people that you put in front of them. You know, one of the reasons why I was so excited to have Markia here today is because Markia does represent someone, you know, from the Black community. I don't have that kind of perspective that she does. And it's really important for me then to listen to her and to put her on stage, you know, so that's another reason that I think it's important to collaborate, is because you can access, you know, people who are experts in certain areas, who have credentials in certain areas that will provide that representation if you don't necessarily have that within your organization. And it's important to give them a voice and not just step up and say, okay, I want to be a voice in this conversation. If there are voices in this conversation that are doing that good of a job, then why, you know, why try to overshadow? Why try to be a competitor? Why not just elevate that person that represents them, that has a following? So hopefully that helps.
Great. And since Gen Z likes authenticity, what can financial institutions do just using traditional methods?
Oh, that's a good one. So what I would say is just having them, I mean, even if it's like when I talk to like big brands or big banks, a lot of times, like, you know, they're not comfortable with the TikToks and the Instagrams. They're probably on LinkedIn and like nothing else. And so then it really boils down to, who do you have that speaks on behalf of the company? Right? Have them establish a public profile where, like she said, you're highlighting people who share the same values, or who's saying the things that you want to say but already have that following. Because in doing so, you also get access to their audience. So you're broadening your reach while also highlighting and even, you know, pushing or propelling a creator who's already been out there doing it. You know, having maybe a representative of the company going on podcasts, blogging, you know, or being a guest for a blog. I've done several, there's something called like Help a Reporter Out, right? And so they send out requests for, hey, we're working on these stories. These are all the stories we're working on. Can you answer any of these questions? And I see so many that ask for like people who are experts in the finance industry, like, you know, experience working in banks and stuff like that, who can, and the questions they're answering are the information you guys are putting out. So just answering those, and, you know, not even as a brand, but as somebody who has experience with a bank, or somebody who has experience, you know, hey, my name is Markia, and I used to work for Navy Federal Credit Union, and here's something that Navy Federal does specifically to encourage, you know, Gen Zers to open bank accounts and to guide them through the process. You know, something that simple. It doesn't always have to be the brand who's saying it. It doesn't always have to be the brand who's necessarily pushing it, but people who are associated with the brand, even employees, former employees, people who use your products. The biggest thing for authenticity is customer reviews. So if you encourage your customers to go online and leave reviews, you can then highlight their reviews because it's an actual person who used your actual program or product, you know, and that's about as authentic as it gets. So there's a lot of ways that you can kind of, like I said, it's 1,000 ways to skin a cat without necessarily having the brand speaking for themselves.
Okay, so we've got one we can do one last question quickly, but into either of you, will Gen Z engage in written articles, and if so, how should the written materials be presented? Or is it really that they're only wanting things on social media at this point? But if you have any ideas for written articles, written flyers, etc.
So Instagram is still highlighting photos. So and Canva is a huge thing with Gen Z. So creating graphics out of snippets of an article to highlight an article, that's a thing. You know, it's got to be attention grabbing. It's got to be a line or something that they're interested in. A brand that I think has really done this has nothing to do with finances, but Fashion Nova. I don't know if anybody shops there or gets the texts or the emails. Like, I very rarely see their videos because I don't necessarily follow them. But the texts are attention grabbing. Their ads are like 1 or 2 lines of words, and I'm already going to the website to see what they have. So you can still do articles and just, you know, create visual representations of the article to appeal to the Gen Z. So you're still kind of accomplishing the goal of reaching Gen Z while still kind of staying true to your true form of content. Including videos with your articles if you're doing like online articles. So videos that kind of support your statements, that's good. Podcast clips, things like that to keep them engaged. But I mean, they're still reading articles, but you know, they're not going to read like a 3-page dissertation. So you also kind of want to keep it as concise as possible.
Right. All right. So
can I add to that actually really quickly?
Sure.
Awesome. Okay, I just wanted to say that, like, yeah, definitely there are still people out there that like to read articles. What's interesting though is that the way that they find those articles, right? So often social media is going to be that platform, that on-ramp that gets somebody to an article that they're going to read. So I saw it mentioned, like, do they listen to podcasts? Certainly, you know, but and there are podcasts that are out there that are geared toward Gen Z. You know, this is again something that NEFE has done in the past, is instead of, like, we do have our own podcast mini series right now, but rather than, you know, hoping that people come find our podcast, we advertised on other people's podcasts that were geared specifically with content toward Gen Z. So it's more about, you know, finding out where they are and maybe being there, unless you're building something that is specifically geared toward providing content for them. But, you know, really quickly, just back to kind of the written word, I guess the only thing I would say is that absolutely, you know, you can still make your written content consumable. It's really important that you do utilize video if you can. Video, for all sorts of reasons, increases the ability that your content is found online. And again, because this younger generation is more interested in video, is more piqued by video, their interest is, that's going to be something that will pull them into reading the article. So think about we think about at NEFE kind of the concept of web first content. So that means that you are designing content for an audience the way that they want to consume it, not necessarily the way that you knee-jerk reaction would write it. So do you take an 8-page paper and you create some visuals and you create some videos, and even if that is hosted online somewhere, all of that text and copy, you are still providing it in such a way that the experience for the user is what you have in mind. So just think about digital first, web first, and the way that you're communicating with the written word, and supplementing it in ways that makes it more appealing.
Great, thank you. And Natasha, to you.
Thank you, thank you. As shared from our speakers, many factors intersect to influence financial well-being. To aid in this process, the NCUA has some resources to not only help credit unions and their members, but consumers, community partners, and financial mentors. The NCUA's consumer website, mycreditunion.gov, provides timely, relevant, practical financial tips, interactive learning tools, and financial resources to accompany various life events like starting a job, opening a savings account, checking account, and consumer loans. mycreditunion.gov is also available in Spanish at Espanol, mycreditunion.gov. The information is presented in multiple formats, including web articles, downloadable brochures, videos, and interactive learning tools, like our popular Hit the Road game, where a group of young people go on a road trip across the country, learning how to manage money wisely along the way. Also, our credit union locator tool helps consumers, including young people, find a local federally insured credit union in their area. And just recently, this goes along great with our presentation on video, we have some newly added resources to the site as far as tips on avoiding overdraft fees, infographic that is shareable, and NCUA consumer tips. It's a series of short videos created to address frequent money management misconceptions. These infographics and videos are available and shareable via social media, so you can educate your network on practical financial facts. In addition, the videos are embeddable and include sample social media posts you can customize for your organization. New videos will be expected to add it on a monthly basis. So for more resources, be sure and follow and like us on social media to receive regular updates on consumer financial protection and financial literacy projects. Thank you. Now, Tracy, over to you.
Thank you. And I'll just briefly run through, next slide, please, the FDIC's resources. For those workforce practitioners on the phone, we have on the webinar, we have crosswalks between the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act's financial literacy element and to our Money Smart curriculum. And also, something that Markia mentioned several times is how should youth select a bank or credit union account? So we have a Money Smart supplement for instructors and trainers. Next slide, please. And if you are interested in working with a financial institution partner, we have a conversation starter, ideas for youth employment professionals to help youth access those bank accounts. And we link to the statutory requirement for opening bank accounts for minors by state that may be interesting, and also some resources from the Financial Literacy and Education Commission's resources for youth employment programs and financial institutions. I'd also like to mention the FDIC's Get Banked program at fdic.gov/getbanked. It provides tips for people to open those first accounts, which again, Markia mentioned was one of the most sought after topics that she provides. You can find all of our resources at fdic.gov/youth employment or /Money Smart. Natasha?
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks again, Chelsea and Markia. You did a great job today. Very eye-opening. This concludes our broadcast. As a follow-up, there will be a pop-up with some survey questions, so please answer that so we can better create webinars in the future and get on a mailing list as well. This webinar will be closed caption, and for viewing at NCUA's YouTube channel. So a lot of people asked about, will the presentation be available? Yes, and it'll be on NCUA's YouTube channel in about 3 weeks. Thank you.